Good afternoon. Welcome to the CAF Venturesome webinar on enabling you to multiply your giving. I'm Joanna Walker. I'm delighted to be hosting today and thank you for joining us. We look forward to an interesting discussion with our guests and we're hoping to run until 1:45 today. So kicking off, we are here because back in February we asked you what you would like to see more of or what things you are interested in, and social investment came up as an area that lots of you were thinking about, some of you were doing something about, and others had heard about it and didn't understand what it was and wanted to know more. So we thought we'd answer that call, and here we are today doing a webinar which hopefully will help to inform, educate and inspire you to potentially get involved or at least understand more about social investment by the end of this conversation today. So I'm delighted to be joined today by our two guest speakers, Holly Piper, who is the head of CAF Venturesome. Holly's been with CAF Venturesome since early 2012, so about 5 years now, and has really helped to drive forward the work that CAF's been doing in the social investment area. And Toyin Ogundana, who is the Funder Relations Manager at CAF Venturesome, who joined us last year from a background in corporate banking and also in public sector and credit. So welcome Holly and Toyin today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Joanna. It's lovely to be here.
Yeah, hi everyone, lovely to be here.
Great, so it should be an interesting discussion. So if I run through the agenda for today, before we get started, we are looking to have quite an in-depth discussion around what is social investment, how social investment works at CAF, and bring it to life with some real examples that will help you understand the impact of how social investment can make a transformative change to charities and social enterprises, what we offer our social investors and the potential impact of any social investment, followed by a Q&A. So please do send us your questions. I believe there's some fantastic technology where you can email them to us throughout the course of the webinar and the discussion. Please do so, and then we've got some time at the end for question and answers. So kicking off, I was reading up about social investment in advance of today's discussion, and I was amazed to see that the social investment market is now worth £2 billion in the UK, with 3,000 charities and social enterprises benefiting. That's kind of extraordinary numbers, Holly, I think you'll agree.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's really, and particularly over the last 5 years, we've seen a real growth as more charities have turned to this as a source of support.
Wonderful, wonderful. Good to know it's building up. And to kick off, we wanted to know from you, our listeners, why did you decide to join today's poll and webinar? So perhaps so you could see there's a question up there. Please tick any of those that apply and send us your responses so that it can really shape how we guide our conversation today to make sure that we are answering the perspective that you're coming from most appropriately. So are you just interested in finding out more about social investment? Have you not heard of CAF Venturesome before but are interested in hearing more about that specifically? Are you considering becoming a social investor? Or are you already a social investor and looking to hear more, or potentially prefer not to say? So please send us your responses now. We're just collating those results. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking part. That's great. So it looks like the vast majority of you, with about 89%, are interested in finding out more about social investment. Hopefully that's what we can achieve today between the three of us. Wonderful. So kicking off today, I suppose, Holly, the big question is, what is social investment?
Yeah. Well, hi again, everyone. My name's Holly Piper. And so to start with, social investment's a term that gets bandied about quite a lot, and it can mean different things to different people, but we use it to mean the use of money to achieve both a social and a financial return. So at its simplest level, this can mean making a loan to a charity. So a charity, as you know, a growing number are, might need to borrow money either to accelerate their plans, so to grow, to kind of really scale up their impact, or possibly as cash flow support, for example, to really sustain their impact and to kind of see them through a potentially kind of rocky period. And they'll need to borrow money. They will often not be able to borrow from a bank, so they won't be deemed creditworthy enough, but they will have a viable business model, and they're most importantly achieving fantastic social impact. And that's really where social investment funds like CAF Venturesome can step in, so lending money to charities and social enterprises to help them kind of grow and help them sustain their impact. Now, we've been going since 2002, so CAF Venturesome, which is the social investment team here at the Charities Aid Foundation, and during that time we've made over 500 social investments, totaling more than £40 million, so we're absolutely one of the market leaders in the UK. And now these social investments have been made entirely possible through the generous contributions of individual supporters, as well as kind of charitable foundations, corporate foundations, other grant-making trusts. And we use kind of these funds to make the social investments to charities and social enterprises. When those loans are repaid, we lend the money again and again before aiming to return this to the supporter, which means that if you're a supporter, your money will work much harder through social investment than it will do with a one-off grant. There is absolutely a really important role for grants, but social investment is another tool, as it were, in the philanthropic toolkit that we think is an increasingly important one. Now, it's all very well in theory, but we really wanted to kind of share a particular example with you today. So I wanted to share one of my favourite recent kind of clients, PEAS, which stands for Promoting Equality in African Schools. Now, as some of you may know, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 1 in 4 children have access to secondary school education. There's quite widespread provision of primary school education, thanks to a lot of work that the UN has led over the last 15 years, which is fantastic. But at secondary school, that kind of the level of attendance at secondary schools really drops off, particularly for girls, actually. And that leaves millions of children without secondary education. Now, PEAS is a UK-based charity that was set up just under 10 years ago to really change this. And what's really exciting for us is their model. Their model is to build new schools where they're needed, but crucially for these schools to be self-sustaining. So to use grant money to build the schools, so for that capital outlay, but then through a mix of very modest lunch fees, which they charge the students, some income generating activities, and also funding partnerships with national governments, it means that the schools will become independent of foreign aid over time, which is absolutely fantastic, and one of the things that we really like about this charity. And to date, I mean, they've been very successful. For a young charity, they've built over 30 secondary schools to date, the majority in Uganda, but also a couple in Rwanda and 2 in Zambia. And they fundraise largely in the UK and are really strongly supported by some really major funders, such as the Department for International Development. Now, they're a great organisation. They've been very successful at grant funding, but they still needed to borrow money. So they needed a cash buffer, because if you think of their income coming in was very, very lumpy, and they needed to borrow some money to help it manage that very lumpy cash flow. It wasn't able to borrow from a bank, and that's why it kind of came to CAF Venturesome. And after extensive due diligence in this case, because as I said, they're quite a young charity, we spent quite a lot of time with the senior management and the trustees, we made a £240,000 social investment that was drawn down last year. It's being repaid, and crucially it's enabling PEAS to really expand their school network with the hope of educating 25,000 children by 2019. That's 25,000 children who wouldn't otherwise have access to secondary school education, which is an achievement we're incredibly proud of.
That's wonderful. It's great to hear it in action. So the theory behind it, of how it works, and recycling donations and philanthropic capital. And actually to hear it in action overseas in a way that's quite transformative. And I suppose social investment is forming part of the suite of funding for these organisations, so it's an alternative to complement grant funding.
Absolutely. So it's kind of for PEAS case, it was really the missing piece that really enabled them to accelerate their plans last year. But it's all down to the hard work of their team, and particularly some generosity from a lot of grant funders making this happen.
That's great. Wonderful. Thank you. Toyin, so something I'm interested to know, and I think our listeners too, in the context of wanting to know more about social investment, is tell us how it works at CAF. How does CAF Venturesome engage in this?
Thank you, Joanna, and hello, everyone. So, yeah, touching on and probably reflecting on some of what Holly said, CAF Venturesome, we've been in operation now for over 15 years. And in that time, we've been able to support over 500 different individual organisations, both charities and social enterprises, and have provided social investment loans of over £40 million. So how have we done this? Well, for us, it's very much about being able to support charities. It's about enabling them to become more sustainable long term, but also allowing them to become stronger. As we all know and have probably seen, there's greater challenges in the sector, especially sort of post 2008. There were a lot more financial strains on a number of individual organisations. So we've been very much here to support charities and social enterprises who perhaps otherwise would not have been able to secure social investment or finance in traditional methods. So our social investment, we operate on a very affordable and flexible basis. We look to support charities. We're not looking to create barriers to them being successful in providing funding. We operate across the whole of the UK, but as the case study of Peas also highlights, we also have international reach. If an organisation is based in the UK and largely funded in the UK, but their reach is international, then we're also able to support that. At CAF Venturesome, we serve to support smaller charities, and that's not to say that we wouldn't look at the larger ones. It's just that the range of our funding is from £25,000 to about £350,000, and that really means that we can support the smaller end of the charitable sector, the organisations who perhaps are in their early stages of being set up, but also those who are perhaps otherwise wouldn't get the sort of the visibility that some of the larger ones would as well. And we do all of our lending on an unsecured basis, which means that we don't look to take any security over the assets that the organisations may have, and that just provides them with a little bit more flexibility in terms of their broader financial scope as well. I think one of the great things that makes us quite unique as well, Joanna, is that we are wholly philanthropic as a fund. So all of the capital that we deploy through social investment comes through the contributions of philanthropists and individuals, as well as grant-making trusts as well, and we work with some corporate foundations. And I think this enables us to be uniquely positioned. It means that we're able to focus very much on high impact, and that's not to say we don't focus on the financial performance or assess risk adequately, but it means that we can make a decision on the types of organisations that we support and really try and drive their social impact as well.
That's great. So if you're looking at that balance between social and financial return, what you're saying is CAF Venturesome is really deeply concerned about the social return and the impact.
Yes.
And the financial return is part of that, but not the most key focus.
Exactly. For us, it's very much a focus on the social impact. We very much assess the financial position of organisations. We assess the risk as part of that, but we're not looking at the financial return. We're looking to be repaid, and that's sort of touching on, probably going on to the next slide, kind of how, what our social investment offers social investors as well around the impact and the recycling element, which I will now touch on a bit more. So
Please do.
on the next slide, you can see there's sort of 4 areas I really wanted to highlight about how we do our social investment here. So wider impact, as I touched on, we cover the UK wide, so we can support organisations across the whole of the country, as well as those with international reach as well. And in terms of the wider impact, we're in a unique position where, as the loans are repaid to us from these charitable organisations, we are then able to recycle that capital. So any contribution that is made from a charitable trust, we hold it for a 6-year period, and in that time we hope to be able to deploy it twice fully. So our loans are typically a 3-year term, so we would make a loan to an organisation, it would be repaid, and then we would look to then recycle that capital into another loan. And that really does enable your giving to go further, and that multiplying effect also makes us very unique in how we do that. In addition, our development fund gives our sort of supporters and contributors a broad amount of choice. I know that the infographic you've got is quite small, but it does touch on the various areas that we address. So we look to support children and young people, the arts, community, housing, environment, to name a few. And what our sort of development fund enables you to do is to choose the themes which mean the most to you, the areas that you would really like to support, and then we can actually funnel your contribution into organisations that meet those areas. In addition, we have an proven track record. We've been doing this for 15 years, far longer than a lot of our peers in the social investment sector, and it means that we're best placed to really understand sort of some of the challenges that charitable organisations, social enterprises face, but equally be able to deploy contributions and make social investment loans in an informed manner. And finally, peace of mind. So very much as I touched on earlier, we do undertake due diligence. We very much take a pragmatic approach and a risk-based one at that. And that's not to say we use that as a barrier to providing social investment loans, but it just means that we take everything into consideration so that we deploy the contributions that we get in the best way possible, and hoping that obviously the loans are repaid and we're able to then recycle that capital back.
That's wonderful. So it's a 6-year term of people contributing, and then
Yes.
it's recycled at least once within that 6-year period.
Exactly that. So hypothetically, if in the first phase, in those first 3 years, if we were able to support perhaps 20 different organisations with your contribution, they would then all repay the loan, and then we would hopefully then be able to support another 20 or greater number of organisations, which when you compare that traditional method of philanthropy, it will be one donation to perhaps one organisation. And so this just really gives you the scope to make your contribution go further.
And clients supporting the development fund can choose within the themes that they're interested in. So if, for example, their passion is the environment or conservation, they can choose that as where they would like to direct their contributions towards?
Yes, very much so. We like being able to give our funders choice. We know that each of the individuals that supports us will have certain areas which they really wish to support, and we would love to be able to enable them to channel their funding into the right way, but provide the scope in terms of the number of organisations they can support in that sector, in that area as well.
That's great. That's great. And how many investments do you tend to have within a fund or during the course of the year?
Yeah, so I mean, on an annual basis, we look to make between 40 to 50 different social investment loans, and you know that very much is driven by demand. But we very much focus on being engaged with the charitable sector. We attend many events. We like to do lots of events as well with them, and make sure that we sort of our presence is well known. So 40 to 50 each year is about right, and I think as was proven in the infographic we showed earlier, over the last 15 years we've been able to do over 500 different loans, which is quite unique. And for some of those, actually for a large majority of those, they are loans that multiple loans that we've given to the same organisations. So for us, it's not just about one loan to one organisation, they repay it and sort of we see them walk away from us. We very much want to build a relationship with these organisations, and we've had a number who've had 2, 3, sometimes up to 5 different loans from us as they've grown over our 15-year period, and we're really seeing them do amazing and great things, and their impact has grown phenomenally.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Yes.
So if you have an organisation that is using social investment to really make a difference and is doing a great job, then you're happy to reinvest in them again.
Very much
and
so.
Support them on an ongoing basis. Oh, wonderful.
Yeah,
great.
Very much so.
Thank you. Now, one of the things clients are increasingly talking to us about is impact. How do we all understand and get a sense of really achieving some social impact?
Yeah.
And I noticed you mentioned that earlier, so I'd be interested in exploring that more.
Yeah, I mean, social impact, it's, I think, very much like social investment. It is a term that's bandied around. It's very much kind of focusing on, I suppose, that charitable work and the charitable supports that are being given. But with regards to CAF Venturesome specifically, it's around how we measure the impact of the organisations that come to us. So we're very much looking at the beneficiaries, ultimately the work that they're doing and the people that are benefiting from their amazing work as well. And our development fund predominantly looks to focus on high impact organisations and social enterprises. So those who, through whether it's working capital or enabling them to provide a loan for growth, we can enable them to grow their impact and really reach the greatest number of beneficiaries as well. In terms of our funders and social and sort of the social impact and social investment model that we have, on slide 9 I provided a couple of examples from existing funders who support us and the impact that their contributions have made over the sort of last 10 years. So very much the first example is a £200,000 commitment that was given over 10 years ago, and at the beginning of 2017 we met with this funder and provided them with a bit of a summary as to how their portfolio has operated. And in that time they've been able to recycle, we've been able to recycle their contribution almost 4 times and been able to support over 90 separate social investment loans. And even more remarkably, very much phenomenally as well, it means that the contribution and the actual impact as we've recycled the original amount has grown to over £750,000. Another example being an individual who supported CAF Venturesome with a commitment of almost £1.5 million. And they've been a supporter of ours for a number of years as well. We've been able to recycle their commitment over 3 times, and that has supported over 150 separate social investment loans. And the actual monetary impact of those various loans now has grown to over £4.5 million. Now, these are only 2 examples. And it's not to say that we can replicate this for everyone, but it's just really an opportunity to be able to highlight how the recycling model works. And actually, when we say how to be able to grow your giving, grow your impact, this is exactly what we mean.
That's extraordinary to be able to have that breadth of impact with just the single contribution. That's quite
Definitely,
amazing.
yes.
Please don't forget to send us in your questions. Anything you're hearing of the discussion today between Toy and Holly and myself, do send the questions through and we'll get to them in the question and answer session at the end of the discussion. Great. And in terms of a little bit more about what people are saying who are supporting Venturesome, it seems like it might be an addictive thing to support.
I hope so. I think the work that we do is amazing. We support a huge number of organisations, and we speak to even more. And on slide 10, there's 2 examples of quotes and information and feedback that we've had from 2 of our very generous supporters and contributors. So 2 very different examples. One very much an individual who was a successor of a charitable trust, and for them it was very much a case of making the choice to support CAF Venturesome, but in a way that is almost through leaving a legacy. So this comes back to what I was saying earlier. It's an opportunity to give in perpetuity as well. So the commitment that they would make will just continue to be recycled, which means that it can support a broader number of organisations and continue to do so for the foreseeable. And the other quote as well very much just highlights the recycling effect once again, about the fact that instead of giving 1 contribution, 1 donation, 1 grant amount to a charity or social enterprise, you're able to recycle the commitment, the contribution that you make 3, 4, 5 times, and it really does grow your social impact and the nature of your philanthropy as well.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's wonderful. Do you have another example you could tell us a little bit about, similar to Peas, but perhaps something more local, more close to home?
Yeah, no, definitely. And for us, we love sharing case studies, and it's really the way to bring to life the impact of our social investment loans that we make. So on slide 11, you'll hear about an organisation that we supported back in 2014 called Best Beginnings. So a small charity, and they were really looking to grow their social impact and the nature of what they do. So to date, so founded very much in 2006, the charity looks to support every child, to ensure that every child has the best start in life, working both with parents and also just looking at the health of the child as well. To date, the charity has actually reached over 2 million families across the UK, but when they came to us in 2014, they were thinking longer term about their sustainability from a financial perspective, but also the reach of the beneficiaries and how they could really grow their reach in various and innovative ways. And as part of that, we were able to provide them with a loan back in 2014 to support their operations and also their working capital. And also our loan enabled them to start the development of a digital app, which is a great way to engage with a broader number of individuals. And to date, it's received over 140,000 downloads since it has launched, which, it's great news to hear about how they can use technology and how we were able to support them to do that in growing their impact and the reach of the work that they do. But even more exciting is that sort of since last year they have been part of the Heads Together campaign. So some of you may have heard about this. It's the campaign spearheaded by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge as well as Prince Harry, and very much focused on mental health for individuals across the UK. And Best Beginnings were one of the key named partners of this programme. So they've really, I mean, it's testament to how social investment can both support an organisation in its early stages, but equally the opportunities that it can provide for it as it moves forward. And I mean, our loan has helped them grow, but equally I think through the Heads Together campaign it's a clear example of how their growth has enabled them to sort of capture the attention of important individuals like the Royals, but equally be able to expand the growth of their impact through their mental health support as well.
That's wonderful. I think I remembered hearing about the Heads Together campaign because it was the official charity, I think, of the campaign of the London Marathon this year.
It was, yes.
Which is great to see mental health being sort of raised in that way, and good to know that smaller, relatively new organisations like Best Beginnings can be a part of that. So that's really interesting. Thank you. So how could somebody become involved? And if you become a CAF Venturesome social investor, what does it feel like?
Yep, I can definitely touch on that a bit more, Joanna. So I think, as we've been saying throughout, this is really a model to help take your philanthropy further. And, you know, CAF Venturesome, we feel, is best placed to support that. So contributions to CAF Venturesome can be made in two ways. The first is a social investment, which is in the form of a loan, and this comes back to the period of 6 years. So it's a contribution or commitment of 6 years, and in that time we hope to recycle the funds fully at least once. And in terms of the choice that I touched on as well, you are able then to choose the areas that you would like to support, and that enables us then to support a variety of charities and social enterprises. The other option in terms of contributions is to make a gift or to leave a legacy to us as well, which some of our funders have done previously in our portfolio. And if this is something that you would like to discuss further, please speak to a private client manager, or you can speak to us directly. We will be providing details at the end of the presentation. One of the things I also want to touch on, though, are the risks. So social investment definitely carries an element of risk. The charitable organisations that we work with are small charities, and sometimes they are unable to support us, to repay us, which means that there is the risk that we may lose some capital on the contributions that are made into our fund. But with our 15 years of experience, it ensures that we continue to take that pragmatic approach, we take that risk-based approach, and it means that our expertise as well supports the social investment loans that we make. In addition to all of that as well, we love keeping in touch with our funders. We want to keep you engaged, and we also want you to understand exactly how we're using the contribution that you've made to us. So we report to you we provide a detailed 6-month report twice a year, and that provides a summary of the activities that we have been up to, and also a summary of how the portfolio is performing, and also it just provides some additional details and some wonderful case studies of the organisations that we continue to support in our portfolio as well. And in between these two 6-month reports, we also provide newsletters and updates, and we also have a dedicated blog as well, which I'll touch on before the end of the webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Toyin. Holly, I just want to touch on that issue of risk. Actually, somebody's raised a question with us, and thank you for covering it there, Toyin, in some ways. So we're talking about social investments here. We're not talking about commercial investments. At Venturesome, how do you best manage the risks that, for example, one of the organisations that you supported has something that happens during the course of the 3 years, which means they're not able to repay the loan? How does CAF Venturesome manage that risk?
Right, so it's a great question, and one we actually get asked a lot because our funders really understand that often these organisations might kind of face difficulties, and so wonder kind of what we do. And over the course of 534 social investments to date, so this obviously is something that has kind of come up. I guess the key thing to point out is that we work very closely with all of the organisations in our portfolio, so it is very rare that something happens that is a huge surprise to us. So usually if for example an organisation takes out a social investment and they're expecting to grow develop particular activity and it doesn't go to plan, we're working kind of alongside them to kind of better understand what that looks like and what that means for the future of the organisation as well as for the repayment of our loan, but really focusing on the organisation, its business model and its impact in the first case. We, because of the nature of our funding, we often choose to be quite flexible. So we might, for example, give a capital repayment holiday for a couple of years to allow a charity to really kind of pivot its business model, do something a bit differently, and then get to a point where it's stronger and is repaying our capital. And that's an element of flexibility that's really important. We think it leads to a better financial result overall and certainly leads to much better social impact. However, sometimes that's not enough, and there are instances where an organisation will not be able to, or says it's not able to repay kind of some of the loan, and we very broadly categorise them into sad and bad cases. So, which I know is kind of an amusing way to think about it, but it's a very sensible way, we think, because a sad case is where an organisation is doing really well. They're communicating very clearly, they're trying very hard, they've absolutely got the interests of their beneficiaries at heart, but something happens unexpected. It might be the external environment changes, local authority funding gets decimated, both of which have happened to several of our organisations in our portfolios in recent years. And in that instances, we work with the organisation to really sustain the impact, which might be that we don't get repaid in full, and that's done with our knowledge. Those situations are quite rare. More common, unfortunately, is an organisation doesn't, we don't think it's being managed as effectively as it could be. So it might be that they are not being quite flexible enough. It might be that they're not responding quickly enough to changes in the external environment. And in that case, we, with kind of the backing of our committee, will make a decision whether to call in a loan early, so to get that capital back in order to be able to better support other organisations, even if that might mean the particular organisation actually has to go into administration, for example. So it can be quite a difficult decision, but is one that we make, and that's really important for, I guess, the investees, so the social organisations we're supporting, to know that actually we really have the social impact at heart. We're really interested in kind of making sure that's achieved. However, it doesn't mean that they can behave really badly and stop repaying us, because that's we're not a soft lender.
Thank you. So it's about keeping a close relationship with the organisation.
Yes.
Once you've made the loan, rather than just saying, here's some money, away you go, and we'll see
absolutely.
you.
Yeah, and I mean, we speak to every organisation in our portfolio at least once a quarter, but there are some that we speak to on a weekly basis. So we really do have a very close relationship, and we think that's a huge that's a huge reason why actually our repayment rate is so very, very high. So we think the approach is working.
That's great. Good to hear. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, thank you so much for sending in your questions. We've got a few here which I shall put to my guests. First of all, Holly, somebody's asked, how rigorous is the selection process for choosing charities and enterprises to support?
So it's very rigorous. So before we make a kind of a social investment, so typically a charity might approach someone in the team, might ring us up and talk about kind of what their needs are, what their situation is. So we will spend time with the senior management at that charity, spend time with their trustees, very important, do a lot of financial due diligence, as one would expect, really spend time understanding what their impact is, their business model, and helping them to scenario test, I guess, what their future next few years might look like. So we know it's a very fast changing kind of external environment for charities. We know economically for some organisations it's very tough right now. So we really work with them to really kind of make sure they're as resilient as they can be, and they've really thought through different options for what their next couple of years look like. If we think they've got a really a solid business model, really strong impact, we really rate the team involved, then we'll make a recommendation to our investment committee to make a social investment, and we'll work through what the repayment of that would look like with the charity we're talking to. So it's very much on a bespoke basis, flexible to their needs, and our investment committee has the final say. So that has actually CAF's CEO, it kind of chairs our investment committee, and we have 6 external people who bring a range of skills, be it managing their own charities, kind of accountants, commercial investors, and they have the final say.
Oh, that's great. So there's quite a lot of external experience brought to bear in approving those
absolutely
investments. That's wonderful. Thank you. Toyin, another question we've had is there a minimum contribution level to be part of CAF Venturesome?
Thanks, Joanna. And yes, there is. So our minimum contribution is £20,000, and that would be for the 6-year term that I touched on earlier. There is no maximum if you are looking to gift a contribution to CAF Venturesome, but if you are looking to make a social investment loan to us, we do have a maximum of £2 million.
Okay. So there's plenty of scope there for people to join at whatever level they would like to and feels appropriate for
Exactly,
them.
a very broad scope. And also we have existing funders who perhaps it's their first time making a social investment, so they dip their toe in, shall we say, with a smaller amount, but the door remains open. They can always come back and top up, and they can do it either as a social investment loan or a gift or a mixture of both. We remain flexible to sort of meeting what works for the individual.
Great. And if somebody's passionate about one particular organisation in your portfolio, can they say, oh, I just want to support this organisation because I know them really well?
So that's a little bit more tricky for us, and I think it in some ways it detracts from the potential impact that your contribution can make. So we touched on some of the themes. So we focus, or we've managed to, I suppose, try and narrow down sort of core charitable themes into 10. And this, once again, touches on children, health, arts, disability, community, and a few more as well. We typically would encourage our supporters and anyone who wants to contribute to support at least 7. And the reason we say that is so that we are able to deploy the contribution as best as possible. The one thing we don't want is that you receive your report and you're saying, oh, well, you're actually not utilising the contribution that I made. We want to be able to support the broadest number of charitable organisations and social enterprises in the areas that you wish to support as well. The one exception to that, I suppose, is that we do have a children and young people specific fund that we've set up as well, and that's because a large number of the organisations that do come to us, or the demand very much is high from the children and young people sector, and I think that's in some ways because it's pretty broad, and in some ways it can overlap some of the other charitable themes and sectors that we follow as well. But very much we would encourage you to kind of have a broader scope, and there is always the option to support all 10 themes, and there's also the option as to whether you want to support UK only organisations or UK and international organisations. In that case it would be an organisation like the Peas case study that we gave earlier.
Great. And I suppose if we're talking about social investment as opposed to donations or grants, there is something in there around spreading the risk of your investments across a number of organisations.
Exactly that. And yeah, I think, yeah, you've kind of nailed it in one, to be honest. It's a great way to spread the risk, and perhaps not to just focus on one specific sector, but equally it just means that the reach of your philanthropic giving is that much greater. You can support a greater number of organisations doing amazing work, and we have, you know, lots of examples already, that we've sort of 2 that we've given you today, and a number that we also have on our blog that you can read about, and it really kind of gives you an idea of the scope and the breadth of the organisations that we support across the UK, and ones who are particularly quite small, so you otherwise probably wouldn't have heard of at all, but the work that they're doing is hugely impactful.
That's great. That's great. And you've mentioned the sort of 6 monthly reports. Somebody's asked how they get to keep track of their investments, if you like, aside from the reports.
Yeah. So as I touched on, our 6-month report goes out, and as part of that report we include a breakdown of the organisations that specifically your contribution has supported, and enables us just to provide an update on how that's performing, of the total loan, what your specific contribution in that loan was, as well as the broader report, which gives you a number of different case studies, as well as how the portfolio is performing as a whole. So it's a pretty detailed report, and that's why we do it twice a year and 6 monthly, because when we're not doing that, we very much want to be supporting charities and social enterprises and making sure that your contribution and your money is being worked as hard as possible. But it really does give you a detailed breakdown, and in between those reports we provide newsletters with case studies as well, and some updates with regards to stats and information. And in between that you can always just pick up the phone or drop me an email. I'm always keen to speak to our funders. It's always lovely to have that engagement, so yeah, always feel free to contact us.
That's great. Good to know, I think, having that personal contact. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much Toyin and Holly for a really comprehensive and fascinating run through of social investment, and in particular how CAF Venturesome tackles this relatively new world for a lot of us. If people have found it useful today and want to hear more, how could they do that?
Yeah, so there's lots of ways in which you can stay in touch. So first of all, I'd encourage you all to have a look at our wonderful website. So lots of information on there and a lot of sort of detail, probably mirroring much of what you've heard today, but with, you've got the time then to absorb everything. So it provides details of how to become a social investor, and also how to get in touch with myself directly, or how to speak, obviously to speak to your private client manager as well. In addition, on slide 14, we've provided a link to our blog, and we'll be sharing these slides with you. So it should be very easy to find, hopefully. But this is the dedicated blog that I was touching on earlier. There's lots of examples and case studies of the organisations we've supported, but also a summary of what the team's up to. So, an element of the events that we attend, often we have speaking opportunities as well. So we're talking to the sector about our experience of social investment, and also touching on that uniqueness that we're wholly philanthropic as well. So that's a great way to read more about what we're doing. And in addition, following this webinar, we will be sending out a copy of the recording, and we'll provide a summary of the questions that have been asked and the answers that were given as well.
That's great. I think it's important that people understand just how plugged into the wider social investment sector CAF Venturesome is. I mean, I know you're both going out, you, Holly in particular, are out there meeting other people who are involved in this space and seeing what's going on and what's working and what's not.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think particularly because we've been around for 15 years now, so we very much see ourselves as kind of really being at the forefront of how the sector can further develop to best support the needs of charities and social enterprises kind of as they grow. And I think one thing we're definitely seeing at the moment is, while social investment is definitely very interesting and is an increasingly something that charities and social enterprises are aware of, there are still perhaps a limited number of philanthropists and kind of grant making trusts who are really beginning to use this as a tool to really support their growth. And so we think that's really important. Philanthropic capital has a huge role to play in really supporting organisations who are transitioning to more resilient and ultimately more impactful business models, and that's kind of where we see ourselves really playing.
That's great. Yeah, I think it's definitely part of the future. So hopefully we have answered that sort of main question, which was for those of you listening to find out more about social investment. Just before we go, we'd love you to do one more quick wrap-up poll for us, which is, how interested are you in becoming a social investor with CAF on the basis of what you've heard? Perhaps if you could select one of the options on the screen now. Very interested, you'd like a follow-up meeting or phone call with Toyin. Interested and you'd like to be sent more information. You're already a social investor with CAF, in which case thank you very much. And you're not interested or prefer not to say at any of those options, and we can follow up in the way that's most appropriate for you. That would be great. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much to Holly and to Toyin, and thank you for all of you there for listening. We will take a note of what you've answered in the poll, and we'll follow up in the best way. Thank you ever so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.